They threw my photograph albums into the recycling bin on a Tuesday. Not the trash, the recycling bin. As if 63 years of my life were just paper to be processed and repurposed. My daughter stood in the doorway of what used to be the living room, watching her husband carry the last box out, and she didn't say a word. Neither did I. But I was already thinking about the folder in my bedroom drawer, the one with my name on every single page. Let me go back to the beginning because you need to understand how I got there. My husband Gerald passed in the spring of 2021. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which the doctor said was actually merciful, though I'm not sure mercy is the right word, for watching the person you've spent 38 years with disappear that quickly. We had a house in Clover Ridge, Ohio, a 3-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch that Gerald had repainted every 5 years without fail. Always the same cream color, always complaining the whole time. Always proud when it was done. After he was gone, the house felt like a museum. Every room was an exhibit of a life I was no longer living. My daughter Claire called me 2 weeks after the funeral. She and her husband Thomas lived in Maplewood, a suburb about 40 minutes south of Columbus. They had a 4-bedroom house, 2 teenage boys, my grandsons Ryan and Cooper, and a finished basement that nobody used. Claire said it made no sense for me to rattle around alone in Clover Ridge. She said she worried about me. She said the boys would love having their grandmother close. She said a lot of things that sounded like love. What she didn't say, and what I didn't ask, was what Thomas thought about the arrangement. I should have asked. I sold the house in Clover Ridge. The cream colonial, the wraparound porch, everything. And I used part of that money to quietly help Claire and Thomas pay off the remaining balance on their mortgage. It wasn't a loan, officially. There was no paperwork. Claire cried when I offered. Thomas shook my hand and called me generous. It felt like family. It felt like the right thing to do. I moved into their spare bedroom in October. I brought my clothes, my books, Gerald's armchair, the photo albums, and a box of small things. The porcelain cardinal my mother gave me, Gerald's old watch, a quilted wall hanging I'd made the year Claire was born. I arranged the bedroom carefully, the way you arrange a space you intend to live in with dignity. I unpacked Gerald's armchair last and set it by the window. I thought, this will be all right. This will be good even. The first sign came within 2 weeks, though I told myself it wasn't a sign at all. I had made pot roast, Gerald's recipe, the one with the pearl onions and the thyme, the one Claire used to request every birthday. I set it on the table at 6 o'clock. The time we had agreed on for dinner. Thomas came in at 6:15, looked at the pot and said, without sitting down, that he'd already eaten at the office. He took a protein bar from the cabinet and went to the living room. Claire served herself quietly. Ryan and Cooper were on their phones. Nobody said the pot roast was good. Nobody said anything at all. I washed the dishes alone. I told myself Thomas was tired. I told myself the boys were teenagers. I told myself adjustment takes time. By December, I had a clearer picture. Thomas was not unkind the way villains are unkind. He didn't raise his voice at me. He didn't say cruel things directly to my face. What he did was simpler and, in some ways, harder to name. He looked through me. When I entered a room he was in, his conversation didn't pause, his attention didn't shift, his eyes didn't move. I was furniture. Polite, inoffensive, invisible furniture. The boys followed his lead without realizing they were doing it. Ryan, 16, started responding to my questions with one word. Cooper, 14, stopped responding at all. They were not bad boys. They were just boys watching how the adults in the house treated me and learning from it. Claire tried, in her way. She would ask about my day at dinner. She would bring me tea sometimes in the evenings. But when Thomas was in the room, she became quieter, smaller. I recognized that kind of smallness. I'd seen it before, in women who had learned that keeping peace was a form of survival. I didn't judge my daughter for it, but I felt something harden in me slowly, the way ground freezes in November, inch by inch, so gradually you almost don't notice until it's solid all the way down. I kept cooking. I don't entirely know why. Habit maybe, or stubbornness, or the belief which I held on to longer than I should have, that a good meal placed on a table was a form of language that any family could eventually understand. In January, I made my chicken and biscuits, scratch biscuits, the way my own mother taught me, the way I had taught Claire. I had the table set at 6. Thomas came home at 6:30, saw the biscuits, and said, not to me, but to the air, somewhere above my left shoulder, that he'd been trying to watch his carbohydrates. He poured himself a glass of water and disappeared down the hall. That night, I heard him tell Claire in the kitchen that he wished there was less heavy food in the house. I lay in the dark in my bedroom with Gerald's armchair silhouetted against the window, and I thought, very quietly and very clearly, that I had made a mistake. But I loved my daughter, and I had nowhere else to go. Or that's what I believed then. So I adjusted. I started making lighter things. Salads, grilled fish, things with no smell that could offend, no richness that could inconvenience. I shrank my cooking the way you shrink yourself when you're trying to take up less space. It didn't make me more visible. It just made me smaller. Spring came. Thomas started talking about renovating the living room. He had a designer, a friend of a colleague, come by on a Saturday morning while I was reading in Gerald's armchair. I heard them walking through the house. I heard Thomas say, when they passed the living room door and glanced at the armchair, "We're going to redo all of this. Start fresh. Very clean. Very modern." He didn't ask me to move. He didn't say anything to me at all. The armchair, it seemed, had already been written out of the plan. 2 weeks later, Claire mentioned, in the careful voice she used for things she'd been rehearsing, that Thomas wanted to convert my bedroom into a home office. She said they'd fix up the basement for me instead. She said the basement had good light. Actually, if you counted the egress windows. She said it would be cozy. She used the word cozy twice. I looked at my daughter's face. I saw that she believed what she was saying, or was working very hard to believe it. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for one night. In the morning, I called my old friend Ruth Ann, who has been a paralegal in Columbus for 30 years and knows more about property law than most attorneys I've met. I told her what had happened since October, all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dorothy, you paid off their mortgage." I said I knew that. She said, "Do you have any documentation of that?" I said I had the bank transfer records. I had the written thank you note Claire had sent me, handwritten, on the cream stationery she'd used since college, in which she specifically referenced the amount and what it had been used for. I had Thomas's email confirming the payoff had gone through. Ruth Ann was quiet again. Then she said, "Come see me." I drove to Columbus on a Thursday morning. I sat across from Ruth Ann in her office with the folder from my bedroom drawer, and we talked for 2 hours. When I left, I had a clear understanding of my situation than I'd had in months. What I had done, in legal terms, was make a significant financial contribution toward a family asset. What I had not done was protect myself in any formal way. But what I also had, and this was the part Ruth Ann kept coming back to, was documentation, a paper trail, a story that could be told if it needed to be. I drove home to Maplewood. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. I had made a decision. I would not move to the basement. I would not become invisible in a house I had helped to own. And I would give Thomas and Claire one more chance to understand who I was before I showed them in terms they couldn't look through. That evening, I cooked a full dinner. Roasted chicken, rosemary pirikihite, potatoes, green beans with almonds. The good dinner, the real one. I set the table properly, the way my mother had taught me. Placemats, the cloth napkins I had brought from Clover Ridge, a small vase with the first tulips from the front yard. Thomas came home, walked into the kitchen, looked at the table, and looked at me. His expression was not cruel. It was something worse. It was mildly inconvenienced. He said to Claire, not to me, "I told you. I've got a client dinner tonight." He picked up his jacket from the chair and left. Ryan and Cooper had both made plans with friends. Claire sat down with me and ate quietly. She said the chicken was good. I said thank you. We did not talk about Thomas. We did not talk about the basement. We did not talk about what was happening to us. After dinner, I washed the dishes alone, again. I dried my hands and went to my bedroom. I opened the drawer and looked at the folder. I thought about Ruth Ann. I thought about what she'd said at the end of our meeting when I was putting my coat on. "You have more leverage than you think you do, Dorothy. The question is whether you want to use it." I closed the drawer. Not yet. The moment that ended, my waiting came on a Saturday in early May. I had spent the morning organizing the storage closet in the hallway, something I'd been meaning to do since I arrived. Inside the closet, behind the winter coats, I found 3 boxes that turned out to be mine. Books I'd been looking for. The porcelain cardinal from my mother. And the photo albums. Not damaged, not thrown away, not thrown. Just put in a closet without being asked. I carried them to my bedroom. I set the cardinal on the windowsill. I sat with the photo albums in Gerald's armchair, and I went through every page. Gerald at 24, lean and laughing, the year we met. Claire at 3 days old, smaller than I remembered her being, wrapped in the yellow blanket my mother had knitted. Our first house, the little rental in Dayton with the slanted back porch. Christmas mornings, summer vacations, ordinary Sundays, a whole life. In a box in a closet, behind someone else's winter coats. I closed the last album and sat for a long time. Then I called Ruth Ann. I said, "I'm ready." What followed was not fast. Ruth Ann spent 3 weeks reviewing my documentation, drafting the appropriate correspondence, ensuring everything was done correctly and legally, and without any room for misunderstanding. She was thorough. She had always been thorough. That was why I trusted her. I went about my days in the house as normally as I could. I cooked when I felt like cooking. I read in the armchair by the window. I went for walks in the neighborhood in the morning, past the neighbors' gardens, the dogs on leashes, the ordinary, unhurried life of a residential street in spring. I felt, during those walks, a kind of lightness I hadn't felt in months. The lightness of someone who has made up their mind. Thomas announced at the beginning of the 3rd week that the renovation would begin the following month. He had a contractor coming to take measurements. He said this at the dinner table on a Wednesday, addressing Claire, while I sat 2 feet to his left and was not addressed at all. He mentioned, in the same tone you'd use to discuss a furniture delivery, that the basement conversion would need to happen before the renovation started. He said it would be more comfortable for everyone. He used that word, comfortable. I said, pleasantly and clearly, that I appreciated him mentioning it, and that I had some things I'd like to discuss with both of them this weekend, when there was time to sit down together. Thomas looked at me. I think it might have been the first time in months he had actually looked at me, rather than through me. He nodded once and went back to his food. On Saturday morning, I asked Claire and Thomas to sit at the kitchen table. I poured coffee. I sat down across from them. I placed Ruth Ann's correspondence in front of them, a formal letter precisely worded, outlining the contribution I had made toward their mortgage in October 2021, the documentation supporting it, and the legal position that contribution had established. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I was not angry, not the way anger usually looks. I was simply clear. I told them that I had no intention of moving to the basement. I told them that I had no intention of having my belongings placed in closets without my knowledge. I told them that I had been a guest in this house in every way except the financial one, and that the financial one, it turned out, was the one with legal weight. Thomas read the letter. He read it again. The color in his face changed. Claire read it. She put it down on the table. She looked at me in a way I hadn't seen from her in a long time, with full attention, with recognition, as if she were seeing something in my face that she had stopped looking for. I told them I did not want to involve courts. I did not want conflict. What I wanted was simple: to live in this house with the dignity I had lived with my entire life. My own room, my belongings where I chose to put them, my presence acknowledged at the table I helped pay for. If that was not possible, Ruth Ann had outlined the next steps clearly, and I was prepared to take them. Thomas set the letter down very carefully. He did not speak for a while. When he did, his voice was different, quieter, stripped of the particular ease he'd always spoken with around me. He said he hadn't realized. He said that word more than once. I don't know if he meant it. I don't know if meaning it matters in the end. What I know is what happened after. The basement conversion was quietly dropped. My bedroom remained my bedroom. When the renovation finally happened, it happened around my armchair, which stayed by the window where I'd put it. The renovators worked carefully around it, as if it had always been part of the plan. Thomas did not become warm. I would not tell you that because it wouldn't be true. And I am not interested in telling you a story that ends more neatly than life does. What he became was careful. He said good morning. He asked occasionally if I'd like anything when he was going to the kitchen. He saw me in the minimal way that respect, even reluctant respect, requires you to see a person. Ryan started eating my cooking again. Cooper asked me once, out of nowhere, how I made the biscuits. I sat with him for an hour on a Sunday afternoon, and we made a whole batch together. He ate 4 of them standing at the counter before they were properly cooled. His hands were covered in flour. He grinned at me, and for a moment he looked so much like Claire at his age that my heart turned over quietly. Claire and I talk differently now. There's less performance in it, less of her careful managing. We have had hard conversations, real ones, the kind you can only have when you've both stopped pretending things are fine. We are not all the way through those conversations yet. I think we may be having them for the rest of our lives. But we are having them, and that is not nothing. I still go for my morning walks. The neighborhood is fully green now, well into summer. The yard's full and overgrown in the good way. That means people are living in them. I pass the house 2 blocks over with the rose arbor, and the one on the corner where someone always has wind chimes going. And I walk at my own pace, which has never been fast. And I think about Gerald, and about the cream colonial with the wraparound porch, and about the Tuesday morning a long time ago, or what feels like a long time ago, when I found my photograph albums in a box in a closet. I think about the folder in the drawer. I think about what Ruth Ann said, you have more leverage than you think you do. I know that now. Not as a legal fact, though. It is that. As something older and simpler. The kind of thing you spend a life learning and then spend the rest of it trying not to forget. I carried those albums out of the closet, and I put them on the shelf in my room, where I can see them from the armchair, where I can see Gerald and Claire at 3 days old, and all those ordinary Sundays, where they were always meant to be. If you're watching this and you recognize something of your own story in mine, I want you to know one thing. Not advice. I'm not in the business of telling anyone else how to live. Just this. The people who dismiss you are counting on you to agree with them. The moment you stop agreeing, everything changes. It doesn't always change cleanly. It doesn't always change quickly, but it changes. And you are allowed to take up the space you have always had the right to take up. Thank you for listening. I'm Dorothy, and this is my story.